Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum. Welcome to Nehemiah chapter 13, the final chapter of the book of Nehemiah. There are 31 verses in this chapter. Beginning in verse 1, it talks about how it was found written in the book of Moshe, the Torah, that the Ammonites and Moabites should not enter into the congregation of Elohim forever. So my question is, how come Ruth entered into the congregation? Was she not a Moabite? And that's true. Now there are a couple of answers regarding that. Let's look at the first answer. It's an AI answer. And it says here, it read in the AI answer anyway, that the solution is basically conversion. Because Ruth converted, she is now permitted to enter and be part of the congregation, the family of Israel. However, in this answer from the Talmudic connection, now I don't like to reference the Talmud too much, but only when it sort of gives a little bit of insight or perhaps a interesting possibility. So is there a Talmudic connection here? So I'm going to read this. It says, this a Moabite shall not enter. Okay. I'm not sure how much I'm going to read from this. Maybe I'll read the whole thing. I'm not sure. Okay, at first glance, the book of Ruth appears to disregard the Torah law regarding how Moabites should not enter into the Jewish people as to be part of Israel, essentially. The Torah prohibits marriage to Moabites, but Ruth is not only welcomed, but she's an ancestor of King David, and through him the Messiah. So that's from Deuteronomy 23, but the Talmud states that, tells us that Boaz gathered the 10 elders in order to publicize an ancient law that has fallen into disuse. This Sinaitic ordinance explained that only a male Moabite or Ammonite cannot join the congregation of Hashem, but only females are permitted to join. And then Yevamos suggests that the verses themselves modify the prohibition. Because they did not greet you with bread and water when you were on the way out of Egypt, and also because they hired Balaam, son of Beor, to curse you. The statement of a reason for the law indicates that only the males are prohibited. After all, it is the way of the men to greet with bread and water, and it is the way of the men, and not the women, to engage in hostile action or to wage war. What the oral law does is explain that in this one case, the stated reason for the law can determine its application. The stated reason can determine its application. A matter otherwise of Tanaitic dispute, we usually follow the view that the stated purpose of a law does not determine its details of application, but in this one case, the oral law teaches us otherwise. There are several indications from the Tanakh itself that this Sinaitic law operated from the earliest times. There is the case of Rehoboam, whom Naamah the Ammonitess bore to Solomon, and who ruled over the kingdom of Judah after him. That's an interesting point, actually. Fascinating. There are also several verses from Ezra that, when read carefully, suggest that the returnees from the Babylonian exile also understood this prohibition in this way. What deeper factor makes this law an exception? Why are only male but not female Moabites prohibited? There's a explanation, a profound one, offered, which I present here in a somewhat simplified fashion. He begins by pointing out that all nations stem from a union of a man and a woman, And both of these ancestors contribute equally to physical and spiritual characteristics of the emerging people. In the language of Aristotelian philosophy, the man gives forth the form, and the woman provides the matter. This was not the case, however, at the emergence of Ammon and Moab. In that unique case, it was a father and his daughters that initiated the process of national emergence. Consequently, the contribution of the father directly and through his daughters was overwhelming, and the female element in Moab and Ammon remained undeveloped and insignificant. This is why the women were accepted as in accepted with an A, not with an E, because they did not possess that determinative Moabite quality. Actually, it should be accept with an E. In fact, we might say that it is precisely this that allowed Judah's seed to stamp its own quality upon the Moabite feminine substrate, taking from it only what it itself lacked, only the positive and nothing of the negative. This explanation of Ruth's origin, or explication, provides an important insight into her qualities and character. We have already noted that Ruth plays an exceedingly passive role in this book. Ruth follows the direction of others, never asserts herself. Okay, let's just skip ahead a little bit. Okay, so that's it. So that's an interesting perspective. I'm not saying we're just gonna take it as the gospel, but it's an interesting point nonetheless. An interesting topic to ponder as well. Every alien in verse 3, it says mixed multitude. So this is likely a reference to the events of Exodus 20, when the law was recited, when it was heard in their ears from the voice of Hashem. And the footnote reads, mixed one, every mixed one. Verse 4, dwelt in the treasury, so he lived in the treasury versus he had the authority of jurisdiction over, which is the oversight. Notice also the specific word used, treasury versus chamber or room. Skipping ahead to verse 8. And it appeared very evil to me, versus it grieved me sore. So it's one thing for Nehemiah to express how he felt, his emotions. It's another thing altogether for him to make a judgment and to say that he perceived this to be very evil to him. Not so much an emotional reaction, more of a verdict, more of an opinion, or his perception, his judgment. So that's verse 8. Verse 12, talking about wheat, a tithe of the wheat, which is a crop usually harvested during Shavuot, Pentecost, versus corn, which is barley. Verse 13, to the charge of Shelemiah, verses, and I made treasurers over the treasuries. So those are two different things. He's appointing treasurers versus giving, or I should say, describing what is the responsibilities of Shelemiah and so on. What is, responsibilities of. Verse 14, let not my kindness be forgotten. The footnote reads in the Greek, blotted out, which I have wrought, which I have worked. Verses, wipe not out my good deeds that I have done. So a record of his good deeds being wiped out, being erased, versus his kindness being blotted out or forgotten. A record of his kindness. So it's pretty close. Let's be fair about that. Verse 15, next position regarding this verse. So the prohibition, Nehemiah's issue with what is being done on the Sabbath seems to be not only the work being done, specifically the treading of wine presses, carrying sheaves, loading of donkeys, but also that they were being sold, they were selling merchandise during the weekly Sabbath day, the Shabbat. Verse 17 says children of Judah versus nobles. So these are they nobles or the descendants? The free children. Actually, it says free children. So let me write that down. Type that down there. Verse 18, exposition, wrath. Notice wrath is brought upon Israel, upon people and communities, when the Sabbath is knowingly profaned, or perhaps even ignorantly. There is a consequence for that. Wrath is doled out by Hashem. Verse 19. Significant difference, perhaps even a big difference. It came to pass when the gates were set up in Jerusalem, versus it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark. So this is can be a memory verse. This is an oft quoted verse in the scriptures. Now the difference here seems to be the gates being in position. They are established, they're in working order, they are set in their proper location, place, versus the gates started to become dark, which seems to indicate that sunset is happening, it's occurring, and evening is approaching, whereas this seems to be well before sunset when he's describing, narrating what is occurring well before the evening time. So they're shutting the gates before the sunset. But if they start to become dark, how does a gate become dark? It's just, I don't know, the gate's made of wood, and then they can see that perhaps the sky is becoming dark. That's another way to explain that. And notice exposition on this verse. This is a good, I'm going to say even godly government official doing his job well, and those under him doing their jobs well as they enforce the Torah. Okay, verse 20, I'm just going to mention in passing that the merchants performed their business and worked outside of Jerusalem once or twice, versus there's no hint in the Masoretic text that the merchants continued to conduct their businesses on the Sabbath. So it is clear they were in the Septuagint. Verse 21, I will stretch out my hand upon you, versus I will lay hands on you. This seems to be a Hebrew idiom, and it's used often in scriptures, you'll notice, in these following verses here. And it seems to mean to intervene. So I'm going to intervene. My personal interpretation, however, is I'm going to take care of business. So it could also mean I'm going to make my power felt. You're going to feel my power. Modern equivalent would be I'm going to take care of you in a threatening way. And this simple answer here, someone's asking, stretch out your hands, even in Job. And this answer says it's an expression meaning, what does it mean? An expression when you can't afford something, which is translated can't afford, when your hand can't reach something, it is impossible for you to accomplish. Okay. To stretch out, to send. I don't really like that explanation. I think the first one makes more sense. But to accomplish, to intervene, seems to be the more simple answer. Okay, so that's verse 21. Verse 22, significant difference here. It says, who were purifying themselves. So Nehemiah told the Levites who were in the act of purifying themselves the following statement. He told the Levites who were purifying themselves, and they were also in the act of keeping the gates, they were doing their duties, that they should sanctify the Sabbath day. In the Masoretic, we see significant difference. Nehemiah intervened and ordered them. He's ordering them to purify themselves. They weren't in the act already. He was telling them, you need to clean yourselves. And they should also cleanse themselves. So that's the first one. They should come and keep the gates. That's number 2. And sanctify the Sabbath day. So we notice 3 separate commands in the Masoretic text. Only one command given from Nehemiah to the Levites in the Septuagint regarding the sanctification of the Sabbath day. So what does this mean? Seems to me the Levites are even more negligent in their duties and more incompetent. Okay, verse 23. Next position here. Ashdod. Notice these 3 nations mentioned. Ashdod, women of Ashdod, women of Ammon, women of Moab. Ashdod is a synecdoche, meaning Philistine women. That's what it means. I've read some explanations. Actually, I'm going to go into that later. That it could be Samaritans, but seems to be more likely Philistine women, not Samaritan women, because the Samaritans are descendants of the northern kingdom of Israel. In verse 23, the word married, the footnote for that is settled or located. So how can you settle or locate women? Maybe you resettled them or relocated them through marriage. That makes more sense, but it makes less sense just understanding it as the word literally settling or locating. However, the modern vernacular is to settle down. It means to get married. So that's interesting. Just thought of that at the top of my head. Verse 24, in addition of, but according to the language of each people. Next position here, half spoke Ashdod. What is the language of Ashdod? Again, Ashdod is a synecdoche of Philistia. So that is the language of the Philistines. So one half spoke the Philistine language, the other half probably spoke the languages of Ammon and Moab. So notice when, this is not in my script, but notice when the wives or the mothers are of a foreign nation, they tend to teach their children their mother tongue. I'm going to take, for example, Barron Trump. His mother is Melania Trump, and she's from Slovenia, I believe, and he speaks Slovenian. Right? That's just, the mother has such a great influence on the children. That's why, men, it's so important. Be careful who you marry. Make sure they speak the right language you want them to speak, or whatever, culture, or even religion. So that's verse 24. Verse 25, cursed. So Nehemiah cursed them. Did he put a hex on them, a spell on them? No, he didn't cast a spell. He didn't do witchcraft or sorcery. He treated them with contempt. That's what it means. Significant difference is there's an addition of, or for yourselves. So not just prohibited for your daughters and sons to marry these foreign women and foreign men as well, but not even for you if they're tempted to marry younger individuals, perhaps they're older. Verse 26, exposition on this verse. Nehemiah is basically explaining to the people that this is about perspective. He's framing it in a way to say, you've made a mistake, but look, even the great King Solomon made the same mistake too. And he was beloved of Elohim. He's greater than us. And he was also king over all Israel, yet this was still something he found challenging, something that was part of his character flaw. So, this is not something exclusive to just now. It's happened in the past. We need to learn from the past. Basically, he's bringing up past lessons. Learn from those lessons, or else there's going to be consequences. Okay, I think that's it for that verse. Verse 27, it says to break covenant with our Elohim versus transgress against our Elohim. So it seems to be a lot more serious. In the Septuagint, their sin was breaking covenant, not simply transgressing, crossing the line. And again, Mary, footnote, settle. Verse 28, significant difference. Nehemiah chased away who? Eliashib, the high priest. He's chasing away the high priest. That's what it seems to be saying. Possibly it could also be the son-in-law, if you rearrange this verse and say, and the son-in-law of Sanballat, the Uranite, of the sons of Joada, and the Eliashib, the high priest. So he's son of both of these. Verses of the sons of Joada, one of the sons, the son of Eliashib, the high priest. So Joada is the son of Eliashib. So this is the son-in-law to Sanballat. So Eliashib is the son-in-law, it seems. I don't know, it's a little confusing in both, but really have to look at the family tree and see how that makes sense. Sanballat, of course, is one of the enemies of Nehemiah, who seems to have been a Philistine rather than a Samaritan. Again, Samaritans are more likely, or they're more akin to trolls, in my opinion, from their past behavior. You had the sighting of the new moon, the sliver of the crescent moon, and the Samaritans would light bonfires. Not on those days. They'd light them before that would happen, before the new crescent moon would be witnessed, would be sighted. And therefore you had the change of the calendars where the Sanhedrin would no longer go by the observation of the new moon, of the sighted moon. They would go by the calculated Metonic calendar that they still use to this day. Whereas the Philistines, they're not like trolls. They're more notoriously antagonistic towards Israel throughout their history. And even today you can see that behavior in 2025 among the spiritual Philistines, whether they're physical or spiritual, I'm not sure, but in any case, the Palestinians, that's the way they behave right now. It's so obvious. Okay, verses one of the sons of Joiada. Okay. Verse 29, big difference. I think it's our first one of the chapter. Remember them, O Elohim, for their false connection with the priesthood. Notice these are all insertions. And the breaking of the covenant of the priesthood, and for defiling the Levites. So this is all, these are three very serious allegations. In the Masoretic, pretty much they have defiled all three: the priesthood, the covenant of the priesthood, and the Levites. So this is not an insertion in the Masoretic. It would be interesting to see what this word is in the Greek. Actually, I want to look it up right now. Okay, so this word connection, for their connection, it doesn't say false, but when we look at the wrong one, here it is. This word, that's the word for connection, and it is the term agistia, a close or intimate relationship, particularly within a family. So again, this is an insertion. This takes discernment. So the translators had to apply discernment in regards to this verse, that it is a false connection. It's not. It's implied that this is false because of their connection, which was false, and the covenant, how they treated the covenant, and regards to the Levites. So remember them in regards to these three things. And so it is, I think it's better rendered in the Masoretic in terms of the English translation, but so that's verse 29. And the last verse, 30, that we'll look at, I purge them from all foreign connection, versus thus cleansed I them from all strangers. So it's one thing to clean them, like with soap and water, but he's really purging them from all foreign connection. So he's taking out the strangers, essentially. Not that he's cleaning them, purifying them ritually. It's more, maybe it is, I don't know, but it seems to be. My assumption is that he's forcing them to divorce, perhaps. That seems to be the case. But doesn't say that explicitly. That's more reading in between the lines. Okay, so that's all for this book, for this chapter in this book. Next will be our summary video for the book of Nehemiah. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be probably our shortest summary video. But it's been, again, it's always an honor and a privilege to, actually it's the highest honor and highest privilege I couldn't even imagine to do this work. So I'm just thankful to Elohim of Israel for this, to our Father in heaven for this awesome privilege. There's really no other word to use. It's such an honor, a privilege that has been bestowed, that I've really didn't really seek out. It's something that kind of found me in a sense. Although yes, I do want to do this, like from my heart, deep within, I want to do this. But sometimes they say that good books you don't find the good books. The books actually find you. And in the time of my life when I really started to seriously study the Bible, was a time that really needed God's intervention, Elohim's intervention. So in any case, not gonna blabber on anymore about that. Just thank you very much for your time. Until next time, I bid you all shalom aleichem, assalamu alaikum, irini mazisu, pax vobiscum, peace be unto you, and maranatha. Stay tuned for our summary video for the book of Nehemiah.